Ooh, I'm live. Yay. Oh, I think that's working. Okay, great. Sorry, I had a bit of a trouble setting up my live. So welcome to the Zen Warriors first YouTube. This is a first, and I'm just checking it out to see what it does, etc. But I also wanted to come on and talk about something that I had sort of briefly discussed with someone else in some comments on one of my situations. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm a holistic body worker, and I've been working on myself in 20 years. I started as a movement and massage postural therapist and have moved more into posture rehab. And I worked very much with a guru for about 10 years. I think it was 10 years. I traveled through India. I sat on the mountaintop. I did all sorts of fun things. I also got beaten up. I got the big mirror of who I really am put in my face. And I learned different methods of meditation. And I also learned to throw those methods away to some extent. Doesn't mean I don't use them, but sometimes it's good to know when to hold them. And sometimes it's good to know when to fold them. Today's topic is about relationships. And quite in particular, I think we also are going to touch on relationships and the demise or the problems in those relationships that might come up. So I've been listening to a woman called Teal Swan, and if you don't know her, she's worth checking out. She's on YouTube. She's got a lot more followers than I do. I really like her stuff, actually. And I even had a conversation the other day with a friend of mine, and we've recorded that. So it's a much more involved discussion about the different angles of what Teal discusses in one of her videos, which is about being inauthentic and authenticity, and why sometimes being alone requires is what you require in order to recharge, and that's to do with your inauthenticity when you're with others. And I want to bring that into very much into a relationship, a romantic relationship setting today. Whether I agree with that statement overall is more for the big discussion. And to explain, I think to explain it properly and to really look at it properly does require however long we recorded the other day, which I need to have another look at again. But to look at it just on a relationship level, because I think this is an area where what Teal essentially says is when you're with others and you find that exhausting and then you need to retreat to recharge, it's because in that moment, you're inauthentic. And whether you know it or not, it's possibly because there are immeshment traumas there where somewhere along the way, probably in your childhood, you got this idea that in order to be loved and to feel safe, and this is me paraphrasing, so some of this is not entirely Teal's words. These are mine too, probably. But this is, I guess, my interpretation of it. In order to feel love and feel safe, you're gauging and interpreting and receiving what the other person's giving to you. And so actually what you're doing is you're behaving in a certain way in order to get the reaction you want from the other person so that you know that you're safe and loved and approved of. So this becomes what I would refer to in myself very much as this people pleaser kind of thing, where I'm hoping that other people are going to love me. So I'm going to put Erin's best self forward, and then she said, and that becomes very exhausting. So then what we do is we need to retreat and hang out with a cat. And she kind of, with our cat, and I, of course, love my cat. So Thomas is my favorite being on the planet. And she said, so what's different between hanging out with a cat and hanging out with a person? And I think when you're in your relationship, your cat is probably, or your dog is probably your best parallel to that person that you might hang out with quite intensely in a relationship. And the way we relate can have different layers of toxicity. And actually, one of these layers of toxicity can be this kind of enmeshment, inauthentic behavior. And I guess because Teal used the word inauthentic, what we see is people getting really quite upset about this suggestion that you should never need time to yourself as a human being, because as human beings, the whole way we have survived is as communal creatures. And so actually the only reason you need alone time to recharge is because you're incapable of being authentic with others. I think she's absolutely right. And I think she's absolutely right for a myriad of reasons. And there's lots of ways to look at this. But taking it just on this when we're in our relationship and why we leave our relationships, which is also part of what she touches on. When we're in our relationship and we go through that honeymoon phase, right? And Osho would refer to this as the dream. And so in the dream, he sort of goes, you have this dream in your head that one day you're going to find this perfect someone, and they're going to reflect back to you this idea of perfection that you have in your head, and it's going to be this beautiful thing, and it's going to complete you. And so we have this idea of, you know, a husband and wife being two halves of one whole, which is personally something I hate that concept. I hate the concept that two people come together to make a whole. Two people come together to make a team. And separately they still exist as a whole. And together they exist as this awesome team. And yeah, there's a great thing about the power of two. And I think that should definitely be something that we should consider, because we're communal creatures. So we should not just even live as two people, but we should live as teams of people. And of course, I lived in an ashram, so I'm a big fan of the idea of living in a team. I also struggled a lot to live in a team, because there were these constant reflections of that made me uncomfortable. Some of those things were just people telling me stuff about myself that I didn't like, because I received that as a level of not being approved of. But that actually, and I genuinely say this, that actually wasn't what was happening. It may have been in some people's cases. We're not perfect, right? But actually, it was most people in that environment were very much just reflecting back. Hey, do you see this about yourself? And the thing is that we're so trained into good and bad behavior, and what's perceived as a good person or a lovable person, or what's perceived as the right response or the right reflection from someone, that not only are we requiring of ourselves and our relationships that we should be perceived in a certain way, we're asking the other to perceive us in that way. And so this idea that Osho has in his tarot deck called the dream, where we're asking for someone else to be this perfect reflection, this ideal reflection that tells us that we're worth something. And so then we can relax and feel loved and safe. And then Osho goes on to say, and then of course this dream shatters because it's not real. You've projected onto someone in that honeymoon phase this idea of perfection, and they can't help but at some point let you down, because it's your idea and you probably didn't even let them in on it. And at some point, the reality of who they are comes crashing down around you. And maybe that reality is them reflecting back to you that there's something about you that annoys them or that they don't like. Or maybe it's something about them that you don't like. In our relationships, particularly all of our relationships, but I think that emotional partnership of coupledom, or any sort of romantic triad, whatever quadruple that you want to put together, what happens in that coupledom is you get this very intense reflection. And invariably, there are going to be things about each other that it doesn't mean we don't love each other, but that annoy us and that start to crumble that dream. And I think here, this is where the honeymoon starts to fall apart and we start to get irritated and annoyed. We're irritated and annoyed because I think, because we tried really hard, and that person didn't receive it the way we wanted to be received. And we receive it as rejection. We receive all our hard efforts as rejection. And so now we're pushing that. Now we're probably going to push that person away. That's the next thing. It's like, oh, you didn't like us. Now you're pissed with us. Now you're upset with us. Now you don't love me. Now I'm not safe. Well, go away before you hurt me. So we start getting into this push me, pull you kind of situation. So Teal then goes on to say is actually you get addicted to this idea of push me, pull you. So you get addicted to going in, playing this little game of drawing out the person to give you what you need them to give you. And then perhaps that becomes too much. Perhaps that closeness is uncomfortable for you. Or worse, in that closeness, you get a real reflection that you don't like. And now what you need to do is you need to get away from that person and go take some time, because it was a very intense reflection for you that you didn't want to face. And there's a lot of emotion that comes up. And it becomes very exhausting, especially when we're in this environment where we've been told what's acceptable and what's not acceptable as a good or a bad person. And so we have ideas around who we are, and this is personality projection. And these little parts of personality are actually things that we have added in to make ourselves safe. It's not really who we are. A lot of it's kind of armor and additives and stuff like that. And we all have these things. So sometimes it's easier for us to be authentic, as Teal talks about, to be authentic not with someone, because then I don't have to worry about my personality projection. I also don't have to worry about my personality projection being attacked or being unacceptable. I think the other thing that comes in, like my relationship with my cat, I don't really have to put a lot of boundaries in between me and the cat, for example. I don't have to ask my cat to listen to me. I don't have to ask my cat to shut up. Maybe occasionally, but as a general rule, he doesn't talk that much. I can pick him up and take a hug from him. I don't have to ask for one. He's not going to tell me. He does tell me actually, but I also don't necessarily have to respect his boundaries. But also, I might steal a hug off him and put him back down fairly quickly, and he'll forgive me in a few seconds flat because he's moment to moment to moment. Whereas as human beings, we can get very caught up in the fact that someone's dragging on us or that someone's not respecting our boundaries. And sometimes we don't even ask for our boundaries. Someone in a close relationship situation or even out in the world will disrespect our boundary and we'll get pissy with them. But they may, in their world, not have even considered it a big deal. But in your world, it might be a boundary. And so it needs to be communicated. So something I learned a lot in my relationships is that I'm shit with boundaries, or I have been very shitty with boundaries. I've been very, very willing to do exactly what Teal Swan talks about. I've been willing to put the best errand forward, sacrifice my needs and my wants, not ask for anything, and then end up sitting there going, well, this person's awful because they didn't respect my boundaries. I have also been in the situation where I have put up boundaries and had them completely disrespected. And this is an interesting one where you're kind of sitting there going, well, this person should be respecting my boundaries. Maybe they just don't get it. And because everyone is a little different, but for me, if someone sets a boundary about what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept, and then I cross that boundary again, and then they slap me back for it, I do feel a lot of guilt over that. Part of that is because I hate to have my boundaries disrespected, whether I told the person or not. And part of that may also be to do with this good bad immeshment kind of thing, where I want to always be perceived as a good, valuable, lovable person so that I can be safe. So there is also this other element of someone crossing your boundaries all the time. Now, again, I mean, I don't wake up with my cat sitting on my chest or preventing me from being able to move in my bed. Not really an issue with him. Also, he's rather small, so I can kick him off. But that idea that someone might sit in your boundary line, irrespective of what you say to them, well, then how do you handle that? And surely that is going to be something where you do need to retreat. That every time that someone crosses into your boundary like that, you're actually going to be left feeling like, well, yeah, I need space, or I need space from you, right? I need space from this person right now. I think that's pretty valid, actually. I also think sometimes I need space from my own reaction to the person. And I think this may also be a way to actually look at what Teal is saying in a different way. But I need space from my own reaction to the situation because I might be really pissed off. And just being around a person who's really disrespected me might bring up so much of my anger, not necessarily connected entirely to the situation, but more it triggers that primordial pool of anger that I've carried through lifetimes that I can access and level a whole city with sometimes, that I actually don't want to dump that on the whole person. And so, because perhaps my meditation is not in the right space in that moment, that I actually cannot create space for myself within myself to separate out from that anger. So I need to take a walk, and I do need my space. And yeah, there's a level of not wanting to be authentic there. There's a level of not wanting to be explosively rageful in front of this person. For me, it feels like, because it's not, I don't want to I'm very fearful of and wary of, I don't even think fearful is the right word. I'm very wary of dumping my emotional baggage and that primordial pool of anger on somebody else when it's not their fault. So I think that's really, that's an interesting one to look at. But definitely when she says towards the end of her video, she says, there should be enough space for me, and I can have me and I can have you too, when she's talking about relationships. And I think this is true. We should be able to sit within ourselves and be with others. But I also think that this requires a respect of boundaries. And when there isn't a respect of boundaries, and when someone keeps crossing into your boundary zone, I actually think that disrespect to your boundary and the compassion for yourself that comes in there is, oh, you can't respect my boundaries? Then I don't want you near me. And that doesn't mean necessarily I need to be on my own, but I need to be with people who are going to respect my boundaries then to recharge. And one of the ways that we sometimes disrespect boundaries, and this might be a little bit of an odd one. One of the ways we sometimes disrespect boundaries is by, how do I put this? Is by talking too much. So you're sitting with someone, you're watching TV, and you're interjecting constantly. And the person is like, I'm a good one for this, actually. I do this a bit. And the person is actually, and you may be not reading the room as well, and the person is giving you one word answers, which may be an indication that they want to watch the show and not listen to you, right? So maybe you're disrespecting them by talking too much. Maybe you're disrespecting them by wanting to talk about the thing that they actually don't want to talk about. They just want to let that sit. Maybe they want to go for a walk, or they want to go bowling, or they want to play a game, or they want to, whatever it is. And maybe they want to set it up and just chill without anything being too stressful. So when someone wants to do this, the way you can be the good relator is to allow them the space around you. And I think it's really important that a relationship is a reflection of two people. And often we reflect back to the other how we feel. And this is actually something Teal said recently, and something was like, you should remember that when a child feels a certain way, they will project it out to you to make you realize what it feels like. And we do this as we grow older too. So when you're sitting in your relationship and someone is doing something and it's giving you a feeling, they are trying to make you feel how they feel. And this is such a helpful concept for me. And even in this moment, this is like such a light bulb as I repeat these words. I'm like, whoa. Think about any difficult situation you've been in with a lover, and think about how you felt. Think about their rage or their frustration or their disappointment or their sadness, and think about how you felt as well. And think about what they're actually managing to communicate to you as you feel those things. I do think that there are couples out there that are actually very good at developing spiritual relationships together, where they are capable of dropping into meditation, capable of being quiet around each other, capable of knowing when to lift the other up and dance and party and all of those things. I think this takes a lot of compassion. This is a real development of compassion, is knowing how to serve the other, and also knowing when you don't want to. And knowing how to, I guess that means also knowing how to serve yourself. And so sometimes when you're with someone and they're asking for service, and I don't necessarily mean sexually, and they're asking for service or to be entertained or whatever it is, and you don't want to, don't. But also know how to communicate how you feel and all that sort of stuff. And if their response is, well, why am I here with you then? It's like, well, why are you here with me then? Like, ask the question back. If you're here to hang out with me right now, me feels like this, and this is my boundary in this moment. Moving on to, why we break up. So Teal Swan talks about that we get into this immeshment trauma where we go out and we try to get the reaction out of someone that we want, and then we get too close and it gets scary, and then we need space. And then we do this push me, pull you. And eventually, one person in the relationship often starts going, "You always push me away." And you're like, "No, no, no, I don't. I just need space." And you don't understand why they don't understand that you need space. And whether I agree with "you always push me away" versus "you need space," I do think that what we are doing technically is pushing them away to recharge, because there's a boundary problem. That's what I think is most often the case. There's a boundary problem. I do also think that if you're overperforming, and this is what Teal talks about more, is if you're overperforming, you need space because you just exhausted yourself. So you have the boundary problem. You don't know how to respect the other person and stop asking them to shower you with praise for your performance. Well, that one's gonna get some responses, I imagine. Um, I'm certainly feel like I'm gonna have friends talking to me about this one later. Yeah, so when you're overperforming and you don't get your applause, and then you're like, okay, now I've or you do get your applause, and then you go, hey, you're like, okay, well, that was exhausting. It's like, well, you did that to yourself. You actually were constantly asking something of someone, and it became exhausting. And I think we all do this to an extent. As I say it, I can think of a million times I've done this. In an abusive relationship, I've definitely done this because I've been asking for a non abusive situation. And so I'm constantly gauging the other person and then trying to determine, how do I feed the information in so that I'm safe? And for those of you out there that have been in that situation, what I'm talking about is not a judgment. It's an attempt for us to look at what we can control and also look at how we can become authentic in something. For those of you that end up in those relationships that are abusive and traumatic in that way, it's always worth looking at what you were looking for, or what you were going to get out of that relationship, or what you were trying to get out of that relationship, and why you picked that person. I don't think any relationship is accidental. For me, the relationship I chose taught me very strong boundaries. And very strong boundaries is about having compassion for yourself. And it's really, really important to understand what a boundary is and understand how to put it out there fairly for the other person so that they can have the choice to respect your boundary or not. It's also really important to understand when someone is disrespecting that boundary, and not just because you didn't tell them and they didn't follow it, but because you asked and they refused, or you asked and they crossed it time and time again. We all make mistakes in saying that, but you know what I mean. With regards to when someone leaves or when a relationship doesn't work out, perhaps it's past part of this trauma. Perhaps also, like I said, relationships come to teach us something. So for me, the relationship where I didn't have boundaries or didn't have strong boundaries and I really needed to develop some. And like I said, as I look back over my relationships, I was always willing to play out this enmeshment trauma line with people in order to win love. That relationship came to smack me upside the head and say, yo, be kind to yourself. Have compassion for yourself first. And that means maintain yourself. So, and this is the concept that Teal Swan is talking about, is like in this act, this player on a stage performance where we're getting what we want, we are giving ourselves up. We are losing connection to us. And then we're coming back to retreat into our own space so we can be us. So we're going through this disconnect, reconnect, and we get addicted to the cycle of performing and disconnecting and reconnecting with ourselves, because we're going to get exhausted not connecting to ourselves, right? And so you'll often hear people say when they come out of a relationship, I found myself again. I feel great because I've reconnected with who I am. I've said exactly the same thing. If you're finding yourself saying that, you need to bring some responsibility to your relationship about what you are creating. The only person that can change your life is you. Nobody is going to come here and rescue you. There is no Cinderella story, right? Everybody I know who looks like they have a Cinderella story, they work really hard in their relationships. They did not get saved. They are a partnership, and they still have struggles, and they still have problems, and they still get performance anxiety from their own enmeshment traumas at times as well. Doesn't mean they don't have conscious awareness around them, but sometimes our old habits die hard. So this act, this play of going back and forward between being yourself, sorry, and playing a person, putting your best foot forward to be loved, is never going to get you where you want to be. And so ultimately, you're always going to end up in a bit of a pickle. So the practice then becomes learning to be yourself, learning to maintain your own space, using perhaps your own space and time by yourself to develop meditation so that you can be you wherever you are, learning to breathe out and relax and let go and watch your performance tendencies and watch yourself in that performance so that you can start dropping it. And I don't mean controlling it, I mean dropping it. There's a difference. Oh, I'm performing again. You know, maybe I'll just stop. Maybe in this moment I'll see the performance, I'll just stop, or I'll laugh, or I'll be honest. Oh, I'm performing for your love again. Give me some, like actually, what I really want right now is for you to tell me that I'm awesome so that I feel safe. Imagine if you said that to your partner. What I really want from you is to tell me that I'm awesome so that I feel safe. If my partner asked me that, I would want to give that to them because I want my partner to feel safe. And if you don't want your partner to feel safe, don't be with them. Safety is not something that's, to me, a real thing in the constructs of what we often think of it as. But I can definitely tell someone that I love them and that I love them irrespective, because often we don't tell each other that we see each other's demons, that we see each other's not so nice side or shadow self. And we know your shadow, in a relationship, you often know your partner's shadow self really well, but we don't talk about it because it's going to bring up an awkward situation when we're on the stage together trying to pull the love out of each other that we want. When someone goes, oh, I've seen your shadow self, it's like, no, I'm not egotistical. No, I'm not angry. No, I'm not a jealous, rageful beast. No, I'm not, sexually obsessed. No, like I can relate well, like we start and it's like, oh, I'm not saying I don't love you. If you really want to have a good relationship with your partner and you really want to be connected, you're going to have to learn how to talk to each other about shadow self. And it's such a cool term that's actually come out, and people talk about it now like, oh, I can see my shadow. But it's also like, yeah, and when someone reflects back to you that you're actually behaving in your shadow self, how good are you at that moment of creating a space for yourself internally or being in your own space that you can actually pause and drop it? See the shadow self and all its whatever. I don't even want to call it ugliness because I don't think that that's fair. And all its whatever it is, accept it for what it is. Learn more about yourself and drop it. Yeah. When people leave us, they leave us for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they leave us because we didn't fulfill, and I think this is what happens. Sometimes they leave us because we didn't fulfill our part as the receiver to their act on the stage. And sometimes we leave them because they didn't fulfill our part to the actor on the stage. They didn't give us the applause. Sometimes we leave because we actually projected this illusionary image that never existed onto this person and unfairly expected them to live up to our dream fantasy of Prince Charming or Cinderella, or Florence Nightingale or whatever it is. I've definitely had that happen to me, and it was heartbreaking to not be the idealized female that this person saw themselves having children with and introducing to their mother. As much as that person is a good person, shame on them. Very naughty. Very naughty to expect that, but I don't think it was conscious either. It's actually, you have no right to expect anything of anyone. You really don't. You don't even really want to be expecting anything of yourself. That's a lot to live up to. But we're all doing it all of the time. And those expectations lead to our disappointments, those projections of who someone is versus who they really are. And our disappointment surrounding that is somewhat unfair. And it can lead to us all being very, very hurt. But we're all hurt because our illusion got broken, because our ideal got broken, because actually learning to relate to each other properly is much harder than we think. And it's going to require much more honesty from you than you think. And it is going to require true authenticity. And if you want to connect with that authenticity, you're going to have to learn to make your own space for yourself and carry it with you wherever you go. Meditation is a practice, but when meditation takes you to a wholeness, you carry it with you throughout your life in everything that you do. If you haven't seen The Last Samurai, whilst I'm not a huge Tom Cruise fan, I recommend you watch it. And it looks at the meditation that the samurai do and everything that they do. And the Japanese, their tea pouring ceremony and the way they make matcha tea is all about part of this perfection and honor of the thing in the moment. Osho would say, when you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. When you eat, just eat. Just be in the one thing. Just be right there. And that is meditation. I wanted to mention Socrates in relation to, those difficult relationships, because I think difficult relationships sometimes reflect to us the biggest parts of our shadow self, not because the other person hasn't got their shadow self on the go, but actually because their difficult relationship brings up our shadow quicker. The mirror is it's mirroring our shadow as well. And Socrates was married to Xanthippe. And Xanthippe was rumored to be the most hysterical, and I hate using hysterical to describe women, but it was back then, and keep it as a timely thing, was described as one of the most hysterical, emotional women in Athens. And whenever he was asked, why did you marry this woman? His response was, if I can stay centered with her, I can stay centered with anyone. If I can have my space, I can have her too. And so Teal Swan, somehow her words are somewhat reflected in that old Socratic tale, or Socrates tale. So if you have any comments, this was just an attempt at running live. So I'm going to post this. I hope it saves and does all the things I expect it to do. If you have any comments or any topics you'd like to discuss, by all means, flick me a post. Do give me a like and subscribe. Also, please note that I do work one-on-one online as a coach. I also do corporate and public speaking events. And I'm just looking at what I'm going to try and get my teeth into over the next year or so. So do keep an eye out for those things. Please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, etc. I need to start putting those links down below. I'm at Erin_Zen Warrior on Instagram, Erin Palashik on Facebook, and Erin Zen Warrior on Facebook as well. I would love to hear more from you guys. I would love to have a discussion. So please, 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 let's get involved. Sorry about the dinghy in the background. I must turn that notification off. Have a great day. Try and find somewhere to sit for a minute. Try and find somewhere to laugh for a minute. Try and find somewhere to dance for a minute. I hope you have an awesome weekend. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back soon. How do I end a live? Is that okay? There. The big end stream button.